Hey everybody, this is Chris Olson and New to the Game podcast here with Ben Schneider. So tonight we're going to be talking about something called an ideal client avatar. If you've never heard of that, it's an interesting concept that you'll hear in a lot of like sales training programs and in people that are really hardcore about sales. And what it really comes down to is the kind of person that you want to be your client in your business. As you get more experience in business, this might be something that you figure out through looking at data and looking at your best clients over the years. But when you're first starting, it might be something different that you just kind of are more abstract about. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into this. I'm going to ask Ben some questions, and we're going to talk about this for a little while. But Ben, to start off, why don't you just tell me your thoughts about after the number of years of business you've been in, when you think about your ideal client avatar, where do you start when it comes to kind of making that picture if you were going to write it down on a piece of paper? How do you start?
Yeah, so I think about where I'm at in business now compared to the perspective of an ideal client that I kind of used to sort of manifest or think of. It used to be that my perception of it was a little bit more just like I mean the most obvious use case would be like, oh, let's just who has the most money, who has the most like a disposable
Mm-hmm.
money, and who is so ready to just throw it away and hire somebody. As the company has evolved, as I've become a lot more familiar with the type of people that just regularly hire my company, that began to naturally evolve too. And it became a lot less about the perception of the person and like what I thought they had, and more about actually looking at the historical record of, okay, who are the people that hire us the most? Like, who are the people
Mm-hmm.
that, in my world, who would be the people that really value having a nice lawn? Is it the young professional who has boatloads of cash and but also doesn't like spend any time at their home, or maybe they work from home but they don't spend any time outside and they just want to like hire everything out? Or
Mm-hmm.
is it maybe the older gentleman who loves his lawn and loves to spend all this time out there and like is very meticulous with all of this? Or is it maybe just the family person that wants to have that has a few kids and they want a space for their kids to be able to play and enjoy? And so the evolution of that, it used to be, okay, I want to find this like hyper specific person that fits my ideal client profile. What it has changed sort of into now has become a little bit more of, I don't want to say it's ambiguous, but it's very much it's much more oriented around, again, what are the type of people that are going to most likely hire my company? And then what do I do with that information is I start to take that information and convert it into kind of like what we've talked about in the past with vision or goals or things like that. You can start to kind of backwards track from your ideal client. Then you start to say, okay, well, how do I get to that ideal client? So, anyways, that's where I would start that conversation on more of a 30,000 foot view.
Okay. So let me ask you this then. So when you first started in business, you were talking about how you felt like this was more specific and you felt like it was more about who could afford or who would spend the money on your services. When you think about it now, it sounds like it's more driven based off who would value your services more than who has the money to spend. So when you think about
Yeah.
that, is that more driven by data and historical track record of your company of who you've actually sold work to? Or is that kind of an updated, I guess, updated, more abstract concept where you've had still a pretty good variety of sales, but you feel like more of those type of people are the ones buying from you?
Yeah. It's a little bit of both. There's definitely, I mean, every now and then you get the wild card person that hires you, and it's just like they don't really
Mm-hmm.
fit any kind of ideal client avatar for you. Like for example, normally I'm not. Generally speaking, like people in their 20s or in that like they just got married or something, they're in their brand new
Mm-hmm.
house. It's not super common that I'm going to be hired by people within that greater demographic, and I know that because I've done estimates for those people, and I've navigated the same sales process that I follow for every single person that reaches out to me. And more likely than not, those people don't hire me. But every now and then one will drip through. So again, I think there's a tendency for people to feel as if, okay, once I've decided my ideal client avatar, I'm immediately going to essentially expel and reject everyone that doesn't fit that criteria. I think that's dangerous territory because again, as a new
Yeah.
business, sometimes There's value in sometimes leaving it a little bit more ambiguous, a little bit more abstract,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't want to necessarily restrict yourself. But then on the same token, there could be in a world, let's just say you're a general contractor and you provide luxury remodels, maybe we'll say luxury kitchens, luxury bathrooms, and you fit that criteria. Because of the nature of your business, to scale, we'll say $1 million company, maybe your average job size is 50K. So you have to sell 20 jobs over the course of a year. So in order to get 20 jobs, you might generate a ton of leads. You might build your business in that type of way. You might have a little bit more liberty to be very focused and specific on a very, very specific niche of person or an avatar person. Whereas on the
Mm-hmm.
flip side of that, if you're someone like, I mean, you or I mean, you're much higher volume than I am. I'm higher volume than the GC guy. So
Mm-hmm.
I have to leave a little bit more room for accepting a broader range of people. If I were to really
Yep.
bucket it, I would say I probably have like 2, maybe 3 actual client avatars that kind of fit the general demographic of people that hire me. I don't just have one. So knowing your business, knowing generally the
Mm-hmm.
volume of business that you're doing, as well as the environment and the climate and the demographic of people that live within your greater area, it could be a lot different from someone who lives in like central Raleigh or Seattle compared to someone who lives on the outskirts of that in the small farm town with 100,000 people.
Yep. So let me ask you this. So when you and I have been a part of sales programs, we've heard people talk about getting so granular and specific with this avatar. I mean, down to the point where they wanted you to name it and talk about what kind of way they dressed and what kind of car they drove, what kind of house they lived in, down to such specific detail of like, my ideal client avatar is a 57-year-old man named Bert that lives in a 3,000 to 4,000 square foot house that makes $200,000 to $400,000 per year, that drives a higher end, nicer car, and wants this service. And I feel like the purpose of that is because you want to get that detailed in some ways if you're selling, like you said, super high end custom homes, or like if your goal is to sell a custom house to somebody, like somebody's going to write you a deposit check on a $800,000 job. I can understand being that specific. But for either one of our industries, or for that matter, most of the time people starting a new home service business are going to be in handyman, drywall, paint, lawns, landscaping, pressure washing, like businesses that just don't have that ability. I mean, most people don't jump into selling high-end niched services like that as their first business. I mean, maybe you have somebody like me who, when I first started my company, I was a handyman that turned into a GC, and I niched down over a couple of years into high-end outdoor spaces. But that took me 3 years of figuring out what I liked to do and what I wanted to do. And I definitely had an ideal client avatar that was pretty specific. But now in my current business, where I'm selling mostly service, I mean, like you said, I don't have the luxury of being that specific. I mean, I have clients all the way from late 20-year-olds that work a lot all the way up to retired people and everything in between, at like every different shape and size of customer you can think of. But I have to think about what they all have in common. So when you are starting a new business, like put yourselves in the shoes of a new business owner who is starting landscaping company, pressure washing company, handyman company, one of those more generic services that has a wider berth. Where would you recommend they start with this? I mean, factoring in where they are, what they're doing. But if you're thinking about that wider picture like you're talking about, where should they start? What are some of the most important things that they should be thinking about when they're targeting their ideal client?
I think it's really valuable to remember that there is, let's just say you live in an area with 5 million people.
Mm-hmm.
It's safe to say that, I don't know, and I'm going to throw out just like random percentages here. None of this is accurate information, but again, just speaking generally here, let's just say automatically you can roll out 25% of the people because they're just of an
Mm-hmm.
age where they aren't going to hire you. They're 18 or younger. So okay, now we're down at like, we'll say 4 million people or something like that, and then we go again a
Mm-hmm.
step down, and there's another 20% people that they live in apartment complexes, or honestly it'd probably be greater than
Mm-hmm.
that, but like the apartment complexes, maybe townhomes, they don't really own their property, they're renting.
Yep.
Very good chance they're probably not going to hire you unless you're, I mean, again, you could be super small service and you could be like lawn care or lawn maintenance or power washing.
Yep.
Maybe the renter will hire you, but a lot of times they leave
Yep.
that to the landlord. So immediately what you've done is you've just rolled out like a good 40% of those 5 million people. You're now down
Mm-hmm.
to a 3 million person demographic. Okay, well, let's take that a step further. Then you start to rule out some of the big broad categories. And you'll start to realize that without having to get insanely granular, you actually do have an ideal client demographic. I mean, it could be broad.
Hmm.
Again, it could be 30 years old to 65 years old that earns 100K plus a year or something like that, and they live in X,
Yep.
Y, and Z zip codes. You could toy with something like that, and it's super helpful, especially from a marketing perspective. That kind of information is really pivotal to your marketing agency or whoever, if whether you
Hmm.
do it yourself or you have an agency, because they can take that information and start to, again, with small gradual tweaks, they are going to pivot and adjust and manipulate that kind of ideal demographic and market specifically to those people based upon where those people spend their time. So, an example of that, let's just say you know that you're targeting people who like really, really value their home, the aesthetic. Maybe they have an HOA community. Maybe they're in an older demographic, we'll say 50 plus or 40 plus. A good place to market could be somewhere like the neighborhood Facebook group or the next door group,
Hmm.
because generally speaking, that generation will spend a little bit more time there and they talk in a little bit more
Yep.
actively there. However, if you're maybe really trying to focus on the younger demographic, I don't know, I'm again throwing out just generalizations here. Let's just say you're a car detailing company. Maybe there's a younger generation demographic that would be interested in hiring you. Again,
Hmm.
I'm not saying that's specific, but with something of that nature, it's very likely social media might be your best bet. Instagram, Reels, TikTok, Facebook, like start getting your face more planted in those places. So those are examples of like where being able to again get to the broad category of your ideal demographic, client, whatever you want to call it, avatar, and then start to tailor those decisions that you make based upon what that picture looks like.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying about like we make this ideal client avatar for a couple of purposes. One of them is so that you can more easily identify where to spend dollars on marketing. So, like you said, if whether you're doing it yourself or whether you have a marketing agency, you're going to put money into marketing. And obviously, if somebody like you that does sod, turf, lawn installation is marketing to people that live in apartment complexes, you're probably not going to sell that many jobs. I have yet to see you post on your business Facebook page about doing a sod installation on a fourth story apartment on their little porch out behind their apartment. Um, but if you're a handyman company and your niche service is I'm really good at mounting TVs, you can do a lot of business in apartment complexes, and that might be a great resource for you. And it sounds like common sense, but it always shocks me. I remember being in college and living in an apartment, and I was renting in a super janky, cheap part of town in a old apartment complex, and I would get advertisements for like debt companies, plumbers, electricians, like all these different people that would just blanket the whole zip code with mail marketing. And it always made me scratch my head of like, why is this company's marketing company wasting however many dollars per stamp and postcard to send them people that live in a ghetto apartment complex? Like nobody that lives here is going to hire them. And
Yeah.
it always just made me scratch my head. And like you said, the same thing is too, if your target audience is older or younger, it's going to change where you put your marketing dollars, and it might change the way that you market too. Like you said, like if your target audience or your target client avatar is 40 to 60 years old, you might have better luck with mail marketing than hilarious TikTok videos. But if your target client base is 18 to 35 or millennials, then you definitely might have better luck with social media. And I feel like when people talk about this, they get so granular when in reality, the first step is that wider, bigger picture. So once we get past that first stage of like, hey, this is my like age range, my zip code range, my large scale, and you have that figured out, what do you think the next step is? Like what are some of the key details that if you're going to narrow it down even further that you're considering?
Yeah. Those are so key because yeah, essentially, I mean, the way I would picture it, I mean, we all seen like a marketing funnel or just a funnel in general. You
Hmm.
start at the top, it's very broad, and you work your way closer to the center, which would be kind of your true ideal client. And then maybe a
Yeah.
lot of people kind of spend themselves like, let's just say this is the entire funnel.
Hmm.
I'm holding up my hands in front of the screen if you're listening. The wide is top, and then you get more narrow. You don't necessarily have to find yourself right at the exit point. Like you can find yourself right
Yeah.
above that again with 3, 4 different more broad categories, but with gradual increased specificity. So thinking about the other things, I would say income. I mean, really being able to determine which, like, we'll say tax bracket do these people fall into. Are they multimillionaires, or are they maybe just kind of the millionaire next door type of picture? If anybody's read that book, it's a kind of statistically driven study on millionaires that still drive minivans and live next door in a very regular suburban home, but that is just very diligent with their finances, and they like to
Mm-hmm.
spend money on quality things. Like, they really invest, they save their money well so they can spend it well. Or again, that's where you get into, you can start to specify things like, do they have kids or do they have pets? If they have
Mm-hmm.
pets, okay, do they have dogs or do they have cats? Do they have a fenced in backyard? For me, that's a huge thing. If you're building patios, that might be a great thing as well, because it tells you, okay,
Mm-hmm.
this person values privacy and they value the space of their backyard. Otherwise, they wouldn't have
Mm-hmm.
invested in something like a fence. And then again, you can start to get even further from there. And again, that's where you start to, I would say, within year 2 to 3 and beyond, you'll find yourself gradually working more and more in a direction of really getting down to fine details. So for example,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna give an example of, and this is sort of moving a little bit away from the question, but bringing it full circle, which is talking about another benefit of knowing your ideal client. And that is because you can start to tailor your sales process to that person. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, if you're working with a younger person, maybe a millennial generation or below that, then what you can often find yourself doing is you start to tailor your client experience. Maybe you're incorporating a little bit more texting. Maybe you're
Mm-hmm.
incorporating a little bit more automation into your process, because they love the idea of just being able to super quick process the payment, get in, get out, and just be done, not even have to worry about a
Yep.
thing. Send them a couple pictures, say, hey, it's great, ask for a review, done. But then also on the flip side of that, maybe you're working with a different generation, or maybe, like, for example, one of my ideal client brackets is going to be people between the ages of 40 to about 60 or so. Their kids are either just in high school or they're graduated high school and they're off to college. And normally there's the husband and wife still work. Maybe the wife stays at home. They have
Mm-hmm.
dogs. They have a really muddy backyard. And I have a thing that I will say every single time, and I nod my head. And it's so funny to see people's reaction, because I'm talking about their muddy backyard. And then I'll use this line and say, and yes, that's why you have a towel next to your front door or your back door. And all of them immediately just like nodding their head, because what I know is that they have dogs, they have a muddy backyard. Anybody that has dogs in a muddy backyard knows you have to have a towel by your door. So it's like one of
Mm-hmm.
those like little inside jokes that you have with a person, that in some way, by
Yep.
knowing that type of information, is invaluable to your sales process, because it allows you to build some more of that rapport. So again,
Mm-hmm.
it's being able to know the type of people that you talk to on a regular basis really, really helps benefit and allows you to start create certain systems and sales processes, and even, like, again, little catchphrases you can throw out to a person that actually speaks to them and adds value to the process that you're bringing to them. So it's a really cool thing. But the more granular that you get with this, the more specific that you get with this, that's where you can start to play with those things a little bit more. But yeah, that's where I would start and gradually begin to work yourself in that perpetual direction.
Awesome. Um, well, I think it's a pretty good starting point. I think that we could talk about this all day, but I think that's a pretty good spot to wrap up. I guess I do have one last question. Um, at what point do you feel like somebody should stop and consider the fact they might be too specific? Like we talked about at the beginning, if you're that high-end custom builder, you have an ideal client avatar that is so specific that it's almost ironic, like it's almost funny. Like the bottom of that funnel that you were making with your hands earlier, like the bottom of that
Yeah.
funnel is, like I said, a dude named Bert who's between 40 and 60 years old, has a corporate job at Boeing, makes 200 to 400K a year, and really likes his lawn. But if
Yeah.
you're a company like a pressure washing company or a handyman company or a painting company, when do you feel like somebody should stop and realize they might be actually getting too specific with what their avatar looks like?
When it stops working for you. I mean, when
Mm-hmm.
it stops aligning with your vision, when it's starting to inhibit your ability to sell or market your business in the way that you want to be able to sell and market your business, or perhaps, I mean, again, in the newer world, the way that you need to be able to market and sell your business.
Mm-hmm.
If you're losing business because you're just being picky about who you hire or who hires you, again, there's a time and a place for being picky and potentially avoiding certain types of clients because of past history or whatever it may be. But when you find yourself in a place where like you're being hyper specific, and then all of a sudden you start to not sell nearly as effectively because you're marketing to literally that you're trying to like pick out, does this guy drink Buffalo Trace or Eagle Rare? I'm like, that's where you start to get lost in the process. And again, that's my psychoanalysis of that person is that you're distracting yourself, and you need to put your attention elsewhere.
If you show up to the estimate and ask them if they have a dog and they say they don't have a dog, and you say, sorry, I can't help you, I'm going to leave.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Don't do that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's a good spot to wrap up. Appreciate you guys listening. This is definitely a topic that we can dig into for a long time. And it's a really good exercise for you to do if you're in a business, whether you're just starting, whether you've been around for a long time. If you've never sat down and thought about it. So if you're new in business, think about that person that you would like to work for, who can afford your services, who wants and needs and values what you offer, and write it down on a piece of paper. If you've been in business for 3, 5, 7, 10 years, the way that I love to talk about this to people is sit down and think about the 5 clients over the last few years that you enjoyed working with the most. Write about them on a piece of paper, find the overlap, and you would be shocked at how much similarity you'll find between those 3, 4, 5 people. I remember doing this exercise in a coaching group when I was probably 3 years in, and I realized that when I thought about my top 3 favorite clients, they were very shockingly similar in like their job, their house, their location, the way they kept their yard, the kind of cars they drove, their income levels, their family size, their pets. Like they were all shockingly similar. So it's a good exercise to do, write down on a piece of paper and get as granular as you want. But when you think about applying that to your overall business, don't take it so literally that you factor people out of your marketing and sales process that would be good clients. But the more specific you can get with what your ideal client looks like gives you a great starting point to think about this whole concept. If you want to talk more about this, I'm going to be making a post about it in our school group and starting a conversation about it. If you're not in our school group, come join us. It's free. It's a community for young and aspiring entrepreneurs that are either thinking about starting a company or have started a company and want extra help and want a community of people that are doing the same thing. The link will be in the show notes, either on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you're listening on. And otherwise, thanks everybody for listening. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you on the next episode.